The primary takeaways from this short talk is to learn why framing and structuring your research is important, how to develop a research proposal, and how to effectively communicate your ideas. Some of the biggest problems that we've seen in previous proposals to various competitions at YouthMappers, but then also elsewhere, because those of us in the executive committee of YouthMappers review proposals from all over the place, not just for YouthMappers, is that an unstructured and sort of poorly thought through research proposal really doesn't convey the idea that your proposal will be successful. And that's key to a proposal. You're really trying to communicate effectively that what you're doing has been sufficiently well thought out that you will achieve what you set out to achieve in your proposal. And so that's really what this talk is designed to help you do. So why is it important to frame your research or to give it an overview? This is important because it gives you a structure around which you can then structure your own work. So you have a framework around which you can easily and simply identify what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and how you're going to communicate it out. But it also makes sure that you're communicating your ideas effectively to others. And so I know a lot of our ideas in YouthMappers start from a meeting where we get excited about a new tool, or we get excited about an idea, and we talk about how we could do this and we could do that, and we can go here and we could collect these data and we could collect those data. And those are all very exciting and innovative conversations to have. If we can't transcribe those innovative thoughts into a coherent proposal, it's a shame, because then we can't get it funded. And so this is one way to help you frame and communicate that research. So we call this an integrated research proposal. Why do we call it integrated research proposal? Because all of these parts are necessary. I'm going to talk about the three stools of a research proposal, the three important legs of the stool, I should say, the three important legs of the stool that is the research proposal that I see the biggest problems with repeatedly. And I'll go through and I'll highlight those as we go through our elements of a good research proposal. So first of all, one of the first things to note about a good research proposal is that it has a clear and simple problem statement. It's often very tempting for us to try to solve all of the problems that we see. Or we may say the only way to solve this problem is to also examine this and this and this and this, because they're all related. And while it might be true that our problems are related to each other, the challenges in a research proposal, and especially one of this size, which is a rather small research award, it's impossible to fully address all of those problems that we see. And so we really need to pick a very clear and a very simple issue that we're going to work on. In the past, in research proposals, oftentimes it's not clear at all what the chapter is proposing, because there's simply too many things going on. They're proposing to look at this and this, but also this. And so it gets very, very confusing very quickly, because they haven't focused on one single issue that they want to deal with. Following from that, a clear and simple research question is one of those three legs of the proposal stool that I mentioned. Oftentimes a research proposal will fail because the research question is unanswerable. And I'll talk about in a following slide what it means to have an unanswerable research question. Another reason that proposals often fail to receive funding is because they have too many research questions. I saw a proposal recently with 9 research questions, and it's simply not possible to fully answer 9 research questions. One of the things to consider about a research question is that you actually have to show that you're going to answer it. Posing it and leaving it open is not sufficient to convince the reviewers that your proposal is going to be successful. And so in this regard, it's often better to have fewer, much more straightforward research questions than either a large number of questions or overly complex questions. Because what you're trying to do here is you're trying to convince the reviewer that your proposal is doable, that it can be done, and it will result in the outcomes and the outputs that you suggest it will. So the clearer that is and the simpler that is, the easier it is for you to write the proposal and for the reviewer to understand what you're trying to accomplish with the proposal. Third, good homework is necessary. We often see proposals that are simply a proposal to do work that has been done elsewhere. while that in itself is not a problem, it is a problem if you haven't recognized that the work has been done elsewhere and that you've learned the lessons from that work, what those people learned, what obstacles and challenges they faced, what opportunities they saw. Or if you haven't looked in the literature to understand how a method or a data analysis technique works and you're misusing it. So you do have to do your homework and make sure that you're bringing the best knowledge into your proposal. And we'll talk in a subsequent slide about what research in terms of the background, the homework that you have to do, what that means. The second leg upon which our research proposal stool is built, and one that is often highly problematic, is that you've used appropriate methods. It is very common for me to read, we have this problem, we're going to investigate this question, and I'm going to use ArcGIS. And the only statement of a method that we get is that we're going to use ArcGIS. Using an app is not a method. You have to describe what you're going to do step by step. You may want to interview individuals. You need to describe how many individuals, how are you going to select them? How are you going to make sure that you're not getting bias? So you're just talking to the same people with the same ideas because they live in the same area. You may be wanting to do some remote sensing analysis of imagery. And I have just recently read where, not for YouthMappers, but in another venue, a student wrote, I'm going to conduct land use and land cover change assessment using ERDOS Imagine. And that was the end of the discussion of how the land use and land cover change detection was going to be conducted. ERDOS Imagine or ArcGIS or QGIS cannot do the work for you. You have to describe the steps for that work. And the third leg upon which our proposal stool rests is appropriate analysis. This is probably the weakest leg of all research proposal stools because oftentimes people they're not excited about the data analysis because it's quite honestly one of the harder parts of a proposal. But without analysis, your proposal won't succeed. When I go to a research talk anywhere and I hear research scientists say something like, I'm going to allow the data to speak for themselves, I know that the rest of that talk is going to be a poor talk because data do not speak for themselves. Humans need to interpret what those data are saying to answer whether or not the method has answered the research question. So there's a flow through the proposal, a very clear problem that a question will address, that methods will be used to gather data for the question, that analysis will then determine whether or not the methods have gathered enough evidence to answer the question to address the problem. So that it's sort of a reverse flow, a simple problem that leads to a question, that leads to appropriate methods, that leads to appropriate analysis. And at the end of the data analysis, you should be able to determine whether or not you've answered your research question. If at any point it becomes too difficult to answer the research question, either you can't find the appropriate methods or you're not sure that the data analysis is actually going to answer your question, it probably means your research question is not well crafted and that you should go back and revisit it. And then finally, we've done all of this work. We've done the 5 initial steps for our proposal. If we don't communicate what we've done back when we're finished, we've really wasted a lot of time and money because we're doing this so we can share knowledge and we can learn as a community. And so we make sure that we have a clear and simple communication plan at the end of this. So let me go through each of these elements a little bit more carefully. So let's start with defining the problem, that problem that you start in step 1. So the urge really is to try to solve all the problems that you see in front of you. It's a common thing to try to take a big issue like lack of access to water or lack of women's empowerment or lack of access to transportation or some big problem and try to say, we're going to take it on and try to solve this big issue. That's rarely possible, even in a big research project with lots of funding. It's rarely possible to solve all of those problems. And what you end up getting into is a very muddled project. It's not very clear that you're going to accomplish anything because you haven't fully explained any one part of that project. So don't be afraid especially for YouthMapper chapters, to be simple, to be clear, but be simple. Don't be afraid to take on a simple task with a very straightforward method and a very straightforward data analysis. Don't try to solve every single problem and every single part of every single problem. There will be further opportunities to do research. We won't get it all done in one. proposal. So if you're very focused in your problem and you're very clear, it will help you tremendously as you try to write your proposal. This is an example that we go through when we're in person, and I usually get feedback from anyone in the room, but now I'll just work through it and tell you what the outcomes have tended to be. So in defining the question, that's often a hard thing. Defining the problem and defining the research question can be challenging. We don't know. But there are a few things that you can ask yourself as you're developing your research question to get a better question. There is no perfect question, but you could get a better question. So the first one is, what is the time and cost for women in downtown Dar es Salaam to travel from home to market? The second is, how can we help develop women in Tanzania? Oftentimes, I've heard students in reply to this say the first one is too narrow. We won't actually do anything to help our country because who needs to know all of that very specific information? What we really need to do is really develop women as a group in Tanzania. However, in terms of a research question that you can do in the scope of a proposal, the second research question is completely unanswerable. It is too vague and not specific enough, and the geographic context is far too broad. There is no possible way in a youth mapper chapter could actually show that they had helped to develop women in the entire country of Tanzania. And so the first question is much more specific. It asks, what is the time and cost, which is measurable. Time and cost are actually measurable through a research method. You can count time and you can count cost using a method that you can then apply data analysis for. So you could do summary statistics to say, what's the average time and the average cost? What's the variance time and the variance cost? You then also, in the first question, have a very specific focused subject for your study, and that is for women. So you're ruling out men, you're ruling out children. And someone might say, oh, well, we need to get everybody. Well, we can't in a one research proposal get everybody. And so we want to focus on the group that we're most interested in, drawing from our research focus, what we've set our topic to be. We've also limited this geographically by saying downtown Dar es Salaam, which is much more manageable for a group of youth mapper students to undertake than the entire country of Tanzania. And then the actual topic that you're interested in measuring, it's not just the time and cost for women traveling in Dar es Salaam, it's from their home to the market, because there could be other places that women are traveling that if you didn't specify it, you'd also have to measure. So again, question one isn't the most perfect question ever written, but it's better than question two because it's focused. You know what you're going to measure, you know the type of data you need to collect and analyze. You know who you will be focusing on, either who as a group or who as a geographic group. You have limited the geography to something that's doable, downtown Dar es Salaam, and you have told in your research question exactly what you're measuring, travel from home to market. So that is an example of a better research question that is much more likely to result in positive outcomes, demonstrable outcomes. So the second point I raised in the summary slide, do your homework. Your idea may have been had by others and many others, and you want to learn from them so that you're not unnecessarily repeating repeating what they're doing in an unnecessary way. In other words, repeating their mistakes. And one complaint that we often hear from students in the developing world is that their universities do not have access to the peer-reviewed prestigious journals. And if you read the CFP, the call for proposals carefully, we do not require a peer-reviewed literature citation. We do not require that because we know that accessing those types of materials is very difficult. It can be very difficult, but you can find out a great deal about what other people have done from their websites, from Google. There are ample academic resources on Google Scholar that are free and open, and you can find other information sources online. So don't be afraid of the background section that you're going to write because you feel it has to be all peer-reviewed literature. It does not, specifically for the reason I mentioned, because we know that accesses can be difficult. I get this question a lot when we're talking about research. How do I choose my methods? There are a panoply of methods that you can use, from everything from something very simple to very complex methods. But the main point is you need to be very critical and say, do my methods actually give me a possible answer to my research question? I often see that these conversations start because there's a new tool, a new widget, a new app, a new gadget or something that's so cool and we really want to use it. Well, what are we going to use it for? I don't know. Let's just figure out something to use this new tool for. That is not the right way to write a research question. The research question should come out of the research need, and then you find the methods, tools, apps that you need to answer the question, not what is cool. A lot of times students believe that the proposals are only going to get funded if they have the coolest, newest, cutting edge stuff. And that is not true. It is absolutely not true. Just throwing in the newest methods or the newest tool or the newest app or the newest whatever is not going to get you very far if you don't explain it. So a good example of this is I had a proposal that said, I want to use artificial intelligence. We want to use artificial intelligence to determine the cost of market access. And that's all they said. They just said they wanted to use artificial intelligence. There was no explanation of artificial intelligence. There was no explanation of which computers that they were going to access, because you need high-end computers to do that. And there was no explanation of what they were collecting the data for. Was it the cost of access to markets? Was it the physical location? There was no explanation. They threw in artificial intelligence, AI, because it sounded cool. And it really undermined the proposal dramatically because they had left that unanswered. And so if you're struggling with this and you can't figure it out, it might be because your research question isn't focused enough. So when you're crafting your proposal, it may take you a couple of iterations of getting through the proposal. You may get to the methods and say, oh, this is not going to work. We've got to redefine the research question. And again, just to reiterate, don't start with something cool, a cool method, and work backward. It rarely works as a convincing proposal. So what are some example methods? I've seen good proposals use basic mapping, qualitative interviews, transect walks, household interviews, and individual interviews. I've seen them use a bevy of remote sensing information. It's really what is important in this question is what answers your research question. It doesn't have to be all of these, and just, you know, it doesn't have to. You don't have to make it sound more complex or more convoluted to try to show that you're smart. We're so smart. We're going to use all of these really difficult types of methods. And I know a lot of times people try to put as many methods as they can, and they try to say things like we're going to use this and we're going to do that and we're going to combine these two, and it's not convincing every single time. So use the method that best answers the question that you've posed, not one that, again, don't try to sort of pad the document with all sorts of superlatives. We're going to use the most advanced and the most intellectually rigorous. When you start to buff up things and you try to pad things, it doesn't sound good. It doesn't really it doesn't help, because a lot of people will try to make it sound smarter, thinking that that's going to make them sound smarter and inevitable for funding. But sometimes if you do that, it actually lowers our confidence, because we see a lot of padding in the document and not a lot of substance. So be careful about how you use these sorts of techniques. Now, if you're going to use advanced techniques, that's perfectly fine. If you're going to do spatial autocorrelation analysis, that's perfectly fine if you've explained it and it's needed to answer the question. Don't use spatial autocorrelation if all you really need is a qualitative interview. We don't judge spatial autocorrelation as more important, more scholarly, more significant than qualitative interviews. We don't consider that. We don't compare the method and say, well, this one's fancier, so we'll fund it. What is data analysis? This is the third stool of our proposal leg. It's the one where most proposals fail. And it's very routine, not just in YouthMappers, but in all sorts of proposal settings where I've been a reviewer, to see a proposer have extremely good research question and extremely good methods, and they're going to collect a lot of data, and they say nothing about how they're going to analyze the data. Methods are the collection of data. It's how you're going to gather the data. Data analysis is what are you going to do with those data? How are you going to manipulate them or interpret them to tell a story? Those are very separate things, and they're often confused. They're often confused for each other, and they're not really well thought out and well argued. So again, just some examples. You can use simple statistics. You can have a count. You can have a percentage. You can have means. You can have averages. You can have advanced statistics, which are correlations and regressions and other types of tests, t-tests and f-tests. You can have geographical statistics, spatial autocorrelations, cluster analysis, spatial regression. If you use qualitative data, you can have textual analysis, word counts, and theme identification. Again, we're not going to look at a proposal and say, oh, this proposal has spatial autocorrelation and spatial cluster analysis, and this one only has textual analysis. Therefore, the textual analysis is less fancy, so we're not going to fund it. Absolutely not. We consider both the methods and the data analysis are all equal to each other. It's really how you use them that's important. So don't get caught up with trying to use the fanciest, most sophisticated method or data analysis technique if it's not necessary. And then finally, we focus on effective communication because, as I mentioned before, if your research is not effectively communicated, it's essentially wasted because nobody knows about it. And so there are a few principles for the writing of the proposal in general where we have seen more effective communication. So these principles include what we call MOP, which is make one point. Don't try to load your paper or your paragraph down with so many different themes and points that we can't figure out what you're focusing on. Put your bottom line up front. And by bottom line, we mean the most important thing that we need to know as the reviewer about your proposal should be the first thing that we read. It's very common in academic research for even in very illustrious journals and the smartest people in their disciplines to bury the bottom line. It comes at the end of a very long paper, and then the reader is left saying, that was the point of the paper? It's sort of annoying to the reader, and you don't want to annoy your reader when you're asking them for money. You want to try to you want to be courteous to your reader and tell them right up front, the first paragraph. Some of the most effective proposals I've read start out by saying, the problem we want to address is lack of access to water in rural villages. It is important because 95% of villagers in this district do not have water. We are going to interview subjects and have a remote sensing analysis. We're going to use qualitative interview techniques of 45 people and land use and land cover change or water detection analysis. And then we're going to present summary statistics and change detection map or water detection maps. And it's right up front. At the very, very first paragraph, the proposers have told us exactly what they're going to do, not at the end. And more commonly, people break this into the various sections. So they don't tell us completely what their bottom line is. They separate the methods from the data analysis, and it ends up scattered all through the proposal. Do your reviewer a courtesy and put that right up front. And then if you haven't picked up on it so far, it really is about KISS. Keep it simple, silly. Don't confuse. Don't use words just because you think those words sound good. So one of the best examples I have of this is I had a student once who was very self-conscious about their writing, and they would go in and draft the paper, and then they would go in and they'd use thesaurus.com. Thesaurus.com is a website where you can get a fancier word for very simple words. And I discovered this because I went to thesaurus.com and looked at each word, and I could tell what they had done is they had gone in and choose the fanciest word, which was usually the first one, and they rewrote their paper with all of these words that made absolutely no sense because they were just trying to make it sound fancier. So I said, actually, what I'd like you to do is send me your original paper, which was much better because it was simple. But that person thought that they had to sound very knowledgeable, and so they used all of these words out of the thesaurus to try to make it sound, and it didn't make any sense because they were just trying to sound fancy. It doesn't work. It rarely works to do that. So those are some of the general principles. I'm going to ask that if you have, any questions, if you really don't want to speak now, you can send me an email. But I will take a few questions right now about the slides Again, I'm going to answer general questions, not questions specific to your proposal. But if there are any questions, I'll take a break and take a few questions. You can either unmute or you could put it in the chat box. So everybody has a really well-defined problem.
Hello, sir. I'm Maliha, and I'm a PhD student in West Virginia University. Sir, I have a question for you. So sometimes doing the research, the students get confused. And so how can the chapter members demonstrate it that their solution is a good one while working on the research?
Yes, that's a good question. And one way to demonstrate that the research is necessary or appropriate is to do the homework. And so if you've looked around and you can see that what you're doing has been done by other people, you can say either through the academic literature or through someone's website or their blog, these people did this and they found similarly these issues. And so we know that we're on the right track, but we learned from them. So oftentimes the confusion comes because there's no background review or no background research that's been done in that process. So oftentimes that will help students to figure out the best thing, the best strategy, the best question to ask.
Thank you, sir.
So everybody has their research questions finished, and you know what methods you'll use and you know what data analysis you'll use. There are no questions. So what I would suggest is if you're writing for your chapter, as you're writing for your chapter proposal, is to actually take these slides, which will, as I mentioned, they'll be online, and to very, very literally go through this list with your group and say, this is what we need to have a good proposal, and do we have it? And then to give it to a student who hasn't seen any of it and see how much of your proposal they can figure out. Yes, Chilufa. Sorry, could you type your question? Your connection was breaking up and I only caught a few words of your question. Could you type your question and put it in the chat window? Would that be possible? I think the question was regarding the feedback. And the reviewers give very straightforward feedback about what they felt was unclear, but the reviewers don't go line by line through the proposals. And so we assume that your faculty mentor will be assisting you with this. And in fact, this presentation that I'm giving now is because of the questions that we got, assuming that that's the correct question. We're doing this now because we can't give all 60 or 70 proposals that we receive line by line feedback. So now if you do this, if you follow this, you'll have a much better research proposal. So we give very simple, straightforward feedback saying the methods were not very clear. And so that's what we're meaning. That's why I've gone through here and tried to explain ahead of time what we mean by that. Yes, Abdullah. Do you have a question? Abdullah, if you have a question, we're not hearing it. You may put it in the chat box because we can't hear you. Any other questions? We'll have more time for questions at the end, but I just want to see if there are any other specific questions about this process. Okay, so let me stop for a second and share the call for proposals. Just give me a second to switch this because it changes everything. Just one moment. Okay, so one of the issues, one of the concerns that we noted from our past competitions, both this one and other YouthMapper competitions that we've run in the past, is that students often tell us it's not clear, they don't really understand the call for proposals. So I'm going to go through this very carefully so that you know what to expect, why we've written the call for proposals the way that we have. So this is the call for proposals for the fieldwork program. This is not the Leadership Fellowship Workshop, which is an individual program for individuals. It is not the Research Fellowship Workshop. That is for individual research projects. That's appropriate more for a PhD or master's or senior student. This is the Field Work Program, which is chapter-based. All of the awards here will be given to chapters, not individuals. So we have multiple competitions and programs of funding in YouthMappers. And so one thing that you can make sure that you're in the right competition. So the due date is March 15th. I cannot extend that for an individual chapter because of some issue. We're required to provide the same opportunity to every proposer. Our funder, USAID, requires that we have equal and fair competition. And if we gave a chapter 3 or 4 extra days to finish, that would be unfair to the rest. So it is due March 15th. Maybe your chapter finds that on March 13th, you're seriously not ready and you're sort of nervous because you really want to try to apply. Rather than try to submit a proposal that is not ready by March 15th, do know that we expect a 3rd round of fieldwork program competitions in a few months. We're not exactly sure, we're not ready to say when that competition will launch, but there will be at least a 3rd call for these. So if you find yourself unready, it's far worse to submit a proposal that's poor, that you know is in poor quality or is not ready, than to just wait for the next round of funding. So we support here chapters to undertake projects related to the creation of new data and or analysis in the chapter's local or regional community. We do not prescribe the theme of your research. We may in the future, we may have for instance, we'll probably have a women's proposal coming up soon. But in this program, we do not tell you what the topic of your research has to be. It just has to be something where you're looking at the creation of data, you're looking at accessibility, you're looking at something in the community related to OSM or something that you can use that relates broadly to YouthMappers. You do, however, need to make a strong case here. It says successful proposals will make a strong case that the activity is needed and will contribute to local and regional development needs. So this isn't, sometimes there's research that people do out of curiosity. So they really like their local football team and they want to investigate, where did the fans come from for the local football matches. And that's really not all that important for local development, just to know where the fans come from. That would have to be tied to something in a development sense to be considered important. In terms of funding, all of the funding that we give is for chapter use on the research project. It is not for individual use, and it is not for general chapter needs. We have other competitions that support the health of our local chapters. So for instance, in one application, a proposer asked if they could use funding to supply needs of their regular chapter meetings. And we said no, because this funding is to support field work. We have other competitions for chapter sustainability that you would apply for those sorts of funds. So everything that you budget for needs to be enabled to do the research that you're proposing. Applications are not required to deal directly with COVID-19. We are not, there's a little bit of confusion in our second, in our first call. Some people believe that they had to have a focus on COVID-19 effects. That's not the case. You're not required to make your proposals related to COVID-19, but you do have to have a plan for how you are going to comply with local safeguards against COVID-19. We are required by USAID to have a statement of how anybody we fund will ensure the compliance with local safeguards. So that covers the scope. In terms of the format itself, the proposal, which are the 7 points listed below, the proposal narrative is limited to 5 pages, single-spaced, typed in PDF format. My email system will reject a Word document because they are littered with viruses. So it does have to be in PDF. There are free readers and there are free compilers for PDF. If you search, if you do a Google search, you can find them. That 5-page limit excludes the letter of support and the budget, which I'll get to in just a second. So you'll notice that these statements come back at the end of the call for proposals. These are the 7 elements that must, in capital letters, must be addressed in the 5-page proposal. You may write the proposal in English, Spanish, French, or Portuguese. We don't currently have anyone on the review board who can speak other languages. We hope in the future to accommodate that. Again, we don't have a large staff. We try to keep our staff very small so we can send funds to the chapters. So those are the languages that our staff can speak. So you must have a clearly defined and well-justified purpose. You must have a clear statement of the methods of data collection and data analysis, a plan to address COVID-19 safety protocols, a list of deliverables or concrete outcomes from the project, what you expect to actually produce. That might be maps, it might be databases, a communication plan that includes social media dissemination of results, a clear timetable with a start and an end date with all activities specified, and a very clearly stated single contact person, including their name and email address. I've had a lot of problems getting funding because it's not clear to whom I'm speaking and to with whom I'm working, and it shifts back and forth. And we want to get these funds out as soon as possible. And so I will only accept one person to work with in the initial period. We realize we may have to reach out to your mentor or to somebody to accept the funding, but I need to make sure that we have just one person for each chapter. So you can take this, you can copy it, and you can paste it into a document, and you can use it as a checklist. And you have to have all 7 of these checked, because if you leave one out and another chapter has all 7, it makes your proposal weaker. So you have to make sure that you have all of those 7 items. In addition to those 7 narrative items, we require a letter or email. You can print an email as a PDF from the chapter's faculty mentor, including an explicit statement that the university approves such activities. We do that because we've had break-off groups from chapters who submit a proposal, and we don't know which group actually has the support of the actual registered chapter. We've also had students submit proposals without the faculty mentor knowing that they were submitting a proposal. And then the faculty mentor came back in and said they don't support it. So we need to have that letter. And that can just be as simple as an email that you receive and you print as a PDF and include it in the document. And then the budget and the budget justification. And I'll get to the justification at the end of this call for proposals. It's attached at the end. So in addition to those 5 pages, you can have another 3 pages, the letter of support, the budget, and the budget justification. And you must use the attached budget template to the CFP. And that's because we have very, 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 very strict reporting requirements. It is very difficult for us to send money overseas. The US government makes it extraordinarily difficult for us to send this money. We have to have, I'm up to 4 or 5 forms. I think it's 4 forms that need to be filled out exactly precisely before we can send the wire, the bank wire. It's a very, very complicated process. So the better that we can have you fill in those forms early, the faster your money will arrive if you are awarded. So we expect to award between 2 and 5 awards. We don't know how many applications we'll get, but we have a budget for about 2 to 5 awards. You can apply for awards in any amount up to $2,500. That often confuses people. It doesn't mean you should budget for $2,500 if you don't need it. If you add things in there that are superfluous just to up the budget, we'll probably see that and cut them. So you could propose $500, you could propose $1,000, you could propose $692 or $1,101, whatever is applicable, whatever is relevant to your project. But the maximum is $2,500, and we may recommend less funding than the requested amount. This is important. Only YouthMapper chapters in good standing are eligible to receive funds. Chapters may submit only one proposal. You may partner with another chapter, but that would count as each chapter's single proposal that they're allowed. So you can't partner with another chapter and then write your own proposal. Individuals may not submit proposals to fund their own research, even if they're a member in good standing of a chapter in good standing. We are not supporting individual student research. That is a different competition called the research fellowship workshop. We don't support individuals in this particular proposal. When we're finished, at the conclusion of the award, you have to produce a 5-page report that details the problems that were addressed and the solution that was implemented, any initial impacts that were observed from your research. Did you accomplish something that you could measure? And a list of publications, posts on social media, etc., that the chapter produced to support the project. You'll see here how are the proposals reviewed. This links directly back to the 7 points that I went over. Competitive applications will demonstrate a strong need in the local community for the work being proposed, a convincing and very clear, the word very is there on purpose, a convincing and very clear description of exactly what will be done and the methods, data analysis that will be used, a plan to maintain social distancing and or remote work in light of COVID-19, a strong mentoring commitment where senior students mentor junior students. If it's all just to do a senior project, we're going to rate that lower than one where we can see active participation of senior and junior students. That is to accomplish chapter sustainability. Any other additional aspect of chapter sustainability that you want to provide. The plan for reporting, which I just addressed in the point above, and then the budget rationale and explanation. So you can also take this and say, did we do this? If you submit a proposal and you only do 5 of these things, and other chapters submit proposals that do all 7, you're going to be at a disadvantage if you don't do all 7. The other thing is, you have to be convincing with each of these. Just saying we have a plan is not as convincing as actually detailing what that plan is. So that's how we rank the proposals as to which one's more or less competitive. Again, if you look at how proposals will be reviewed, it doesn't say has to use the coolest tools. It doesn't say has to be steeped in the peer-reviewed literature. It says exactly there what we're looking for, and we take those 7 dimensions under how proposals will be reviewed, and each reviewer actually assigns a score based on, did the proposal demonstrate a strong need? Did the proposal demonstrate a convincing? And they rank them. So really what you're trying to do here is you're trying to make sure that you're doing a convincing narrative that speaks to all 7 of those evaluation criteria. And then again, only YouthMapper chapters in good standing are eligible to receive funds. If you're not sure if you're in good standing, you can email info@youthmappers.org. Essentially, you have to have submitted your annual reports. If you were just approved in December, because we have a few chapters who were just approved in December, you can email. I don't believe that you're going to have to do your annual report because you were literally just approved, but you can email info@youthmappers.org and confirm that you did not need to do an annual report, and Marcela Zabayos will let you know that, and she'll confirm with me that what they decide in terms of good standing. And then again, just the deadline to my email address as a PDF. And then finally, this is the budget justification. You just copy this out and paste it into your document with filled in. Professors and students may not support. We don't support stipends. We have some interesting things that happen where professors wanted $2,000, and we said that's not what this is for. This is not a professor support grant, so they're not allowed to ask for salary. Students are not allowed to ask for salary. Largely what we see are, we are going to go to this area and we need support for transport. We need support for meals. We need support for internet access while we are doing our field work. We are going to provide snacks and drinks for people who are interviewing. And those are all allowable. Those are allowable expenses. And so you may provide a small stipend for community members, non-students in your research, non-students meaning not students in your chapter. We try to avoid those because it causes problems when we're doing direct cash transfers. So if you can think of things like gifts, like perhaps a meal, a snack that you're providing while you're doing the interviewing, that's better off. that's easier for you to deal with. But if you feel like you really do have to give participants stipend, if you're interviewing people extensively, or you're asking them to do a lot of work, you may feel that's necessary. Those are allowable. Materials and supplies, this is where we get into things like internet access. We are not allowed to provide chapters computers. It is a rule that is not ours. It is a rule of the federal government. And we have asked USAID many times, and they repeatedly say, do not fund laptops. I cannot explain US government regulations. I just know that we're not allowed to do that. We have funded GPS units in the past. We have funded smartphones, a limited number of smartphones for GPS collection. For some reason, the laptop just doesn't get approved. I don't know why. And so those are the categories. If there are things that you need that we haven't put in this list, use point F, which are other costs not categorized above. So I think that's all for the call for proposals that I wanted to review with you, but I open it up now for questions. So if you have questions, please, on the call for proposals, now's the time. Is there anything unclear or lacking explanation? Yes, Cosmos. Cosmos Mulinga, go ahead, unmute.
Um, can you get me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Oh, all right. My question is, since the US government does not allow the organization to fund the purchase of laptops or personal computers, does it mean if we submit a proposal that involves the purchase of computers, it will automatically be rejected?
No, if you submit a proposal that that includes laptops, those will not be funded. Other things may be funded, but the laptops would be struck from the, we would not award you the funding to buy the laptop.
Oh,
You may
right,
have,
thank you.
a budget of $1,000 and 600 is for a laptop. We would only award you the balance, which would be 400.
All right.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're doing technology, and we don't understand it any more than anyone else does. Why? It has to do with technology transfer, and we are just simply forbidden. And I know it's a challenge. We're not real sure. So Abdullah, you can submit a proposal, and we have a question out to Marcella. Today is a holiday, a public holiday in the United States, so they're not working. We have a question as to whether or not the chapters, we just approved several new chapters in December, and I don't think it would be prudent to require a annual report for a chapter that just got started. So I believe for those chapters, there may be an exception, but I'm going to confirm with Marcella and the other members of the executive committee, and then I will let you know. So what I'll do is I will send an email to you. This chat, I will keep the chat. We don't publish it, but we'll keep it. And I'll look you up and send you an answer directly to that question, okay? Are there other questions? Just in case you're not able to see the chat, if you did have a proposal in a previous round and you revise it and resubmit it, yes, you can take a proposal that was previously not funded, you can revise it, and you can resubmit it. So that is approved. You can do that. You do not have to come up with a totally new topic if you were declined previously. Are there other questions? This is the best time to ask, even if there are no such thing as stupid questions or dumb questions, because I'm sure that there are questions those are questions other people have. So please, let's take the opportunity. It's easier to reply through this media than through email.
Thank you, sir, for the presentation. I have a question for you. like, sir, is there any kind of piloting of research that has been done before by the university and they want to further continue this work? So can they apply for the field research program for this research?
Yes, if they clearly identify what was done in the past in the
Yeah.
pilot study, and they clearly identify what they're doing new, so the tasks that they're doing new. So you may have started a project, but it only got so far. As long as the tasks are for new work, not work that you've already done in the past, it's perfectly acceptable to submit a proposal for what we call follow-up research. It's best, and this is just a piece of advice, it's best to be very honest about that, because if you're not honest about it and you try to hide it, we know, because we know what's been funded and we know a lot about the chapters. And so if you're doing that, just be honest and say there was this pilot, they accomplished these things. This proposal wants to build on that by doing these new things. What you don't want to do is hide it, because if you hide it and the reviewer catches it, then we're going to say, oh, they're just trying to get funding for work they've already done. So yes, it's totally appropriate and totally acceptable. Um, just be um, just be honest about it. And yes, if you have other questions, you can email me.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, you can. I'm answering that question. Yes, you can email me. And I see your name is Charles. I just saw that it's only showing your last name. Sorry, Charles. It's only showing your last name on my Zoom screen. So yes, Charles, you email me with more questions. Absolutely. Everybody, anybody with any more detailed questions are more than welcome to send me an email. Are there any other general questions about the call for proposals or the talk? I've just put my email in the chat box. You'll want to copy it out. Everything disappears with the chat when we close Zoom. So if you have a question, you'll want to copy that out of the chat window. Again, this recording will be posted. The slideshow will be posted, and importantly, the Zoom calls at 9 a.m. and 7 a.m. will also be posted. So you may just scroll through. You may want to just scroll through quickly. I've tried to be consistent, but you may want to scroll through quickly and see what the other chapters' questions were. And that's why we're posting all 3 Zoom talks, Zoom workshops, so that you can learn from the other chapters. Any other questions? Well, we wish you the best of luck. We look forward to reading your proposals. Again, our goal is to support our chapters. We're not here to block your proposals. I know sometimes students think, they're just there to tell us no. We're not. We're trying to make sure that we have development of our chapters. But unfortunately, we don't have unlimited funding. It would be great if we had enough money to give every chapter funding to do a research project, but unfortunately, we don't have that. We do have to, unfortunately, still have a competition. So the question, can you go back to where you're talking about how to define the problem? I sure can. Let me just switch to that. You more explicit about this slide? So this is the hardest part of the process, to be quite honest, defining the problem. The more specific that you can be about the question that you're trying to address, the better. So we want to understand how markets work in the fish market in Dakar. That's not very specific. We want to understand how women make decisions in the rural fruit market in Ethiopia. And that's not specific. We might want to ask a question that's more specific, like, what are the technological gaps that people in the fish market in Dakar face? And how do those gaps negatively affect their livelihoods? That's more specific. Now, that's not a perfect question because I'm doing it off the top of my head. but you can see the difference. You can see that one question is very vague and the other one is very specific by defining some of the conditions in the question, right? So if we go back to our Tanzania example, we have very specific ways of defining what we're doing. Time and cost are specific. Women is specific. Downtown Dar es Salaam is specific. Travel, well, what if we just ended the sentence and said, what is the time and cost for women in downtown Dar es Salaam to travel? That wouldn't be a better question because we haven't defined travel, to where and from where. So, or to where and to where, to what. So here we make that more specific by saying from their home to the market, right? So this is a very difficult step. And this is also a step that gets very contentious when you're doing a group project because people may not agree. Groups within the chapters may disagree on what the actual question is. And I can see it. I can see it in previous proposals where I can see exactly what happened in the chapter is someone was sitting around the table in a group and they couldn't agree on how to make this specific. So they threw it all in the proposal, right? So we can't come to agreement. So let's do it all. And then what that does is it makes your proposal far less competitive. And so even though it's hard to get that very defined question, it's much better in the end for you if you do take the hard step of forcing your group to agree to the very specific question. And the reason that it's very difficult is because it eliminates something that somebody might be interested in, and that's very difficult to do. Other questions? Everyone clear about data analysis and methods selection? In one of the previous calls, someone said, are we required to use something like QGIS? There is no requirement for that. We don't tell you what method to use or what data collection to use. There's no requirement. Even that you have to use OpenStreetMap. If you're going to do a research project and it's not appropriate for OpenStreetMap, you don't have to have an OpenStreetMap element in your proposal. I'm trying to think of any other questions, but I think we've covered most of them. So again, feel free to send an email. If I can answer the question without getting it into your own chapter's research proposal, I will. If not, I'll give you general advice that I would give everybody else. So again, there's my email. And should you have further questions, feel free. Email is free. And I'm here to answer your questions. So with that, I'm going to bid you a good afternoon or a good evening. This will be posted again, I hope sometime after tomorrow, and I'll send all, if you've registered on our Google form, I'll send everybody who registered the link to the recordings and the slideshow. Otherwise, best of luck in your proposals and enjoy the rest of your day.
Hello, sir. I'm Maliha, and I'm a PhD student in WVU. I have a question that may the students should use the mixed research methods, or it can be the concentrated on the qualitative or quantitative methods based on their research proposal.
Thank you. That's a good question. It can be either. You can use just one method, or you can use mixed methods. What determines that is your research question. Your research question may, to fully address the research question, it may be possible to just use qualitative methods or just use quantitative methods. It really is dependent on your research question. The best type of research actually uses a little bit of both, because even if you have qualitative research, you may want to know quantitatively that what the people are telling you there is actually the case. So the quantitative complement might be a map of the distribution of the issue that you're looking at. And so oftentimes we would rely on cross-validation of methods to make sure that we're not just getting steered in one direction either by the quantitative data or the qualitative data. But it's not necessary, it's not required, I should say. It's not required to have mixed methods. It's really, what is your question, and does your method convince us that you're going to have an answer to that question using your methods and then your data analysis?
Hello.
Yes, please. Can you introduce yourself and tell us which
Yes.
which chapter?
My name is Hossein from Duke University of Duke chapter, north of Iraq. Actually, I'm PhD student, but I have questions. Is any support for MSc thesis or PhD proposal for the whole YouthMapper project or not?
So this research is strictly for the YouthMapper chapter. The YouthMappers has support for individual students through the Leadership Fellowship Workshop and the Research Workshop. The proposals that come from this call for proposals have to support full chapters, not individual students.
Hello, my
Yes.
name is Khan Mohammad Ittiham. I am from BSM YouthMappers chapters. So I have a question, that is, do we know how to use QGIS and other softwares that we have talked about? But this research can be fairly just textual. That is, we are collecting information from a study area, like in hand to hand, and then we're analyzing correlation, advanced analysis, or different statistical analysis, and make a simple research point out of it.
Yes, yes. It is not necessary to use any specific software or any specific method or any specific data analysis. And so you may have a very simple, straightforward project. And because you've kept it very simple and straightforward, but you've demonstrated a high need, it will be just as important as something that has complex methods or uses complex software. If you do have a very straightforward question, as long as you're clear about the need for that, it doesn't matter how fancy or not fancy your research proposal is, as long as it's clear and you can demonstrate a need. Maliha asked, how many research questions should we have in the research proposal? So it's very difficult to give you a concrete amount, a concrete number of questions that are appropriate. But what I can say to that question, and feel free to put questions in the chat if you don't want to unmute. The best answer to that question is the fewer the better. I read a proposal previously that had 9 research questions. There is no way a chapter is going to, even a large chapter, is going to be able to answer 9 research questions. And that's largely because the amount of funding that we're providing will not allow for a research proposal of that scope to be funded. And even if you're the best scientist that ever lived in GI science or in open street mapping or in participatory development, it would be impossible in one proposal to answer 9 research questions because each one has to be answered fully and completely. So the fewer research questions, the better. For this proposal, for this call for proposals, I would think it would be very, very difficult to convincingly propose more than 2, possibly 3 research questions, just because of the amount of work that's entailed.
Hello?
Yes, Johnson, can you introduce yourself?
Okay, this is Johnson, President YouthMappers, CK University for Technology and Applied Sciences. Please, I would want to know whether we are supposed to add our own kind of, hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I said I would want to know whether our own kind of expenses can be added to the budget, because I've seen the first number as we not obliged to add our stipend and then maybe some kind of personal amount that we need for feeding and then stuff.
So what you can include, let me just say that your proposal, let me just make an example. Let's assume that your proposal includes travel to go to another location to interview people. You can budget for your own transportation. You can budget for your own meal. You can budget for internet time to travel to and from the location. You can budget for a small, oftentimes when we're interviewing people, we thank them by providing a small meal while they're, if we're meeting a group of people, we might provide small refreshments, some drinks, some small snacks. Those things you can budget for. Yes, those are approved. Those are, if they're reasonable. If you're going to budget $2,500 for a meal, that probably won't get approved. But if it's a reasonable cost, yes. You cannot budget for your own stipend, or more importantly, what we were seeing is professors wanted a stipend for doing something. We weren't sure what they were doing. That's not allowable. We understand if you have to provide a small gift for people who you are interviewing. We ask that not be a cash transfer, because those get to be very problematic. If you say, I'm going to pay each proposal 1,700 naira, right? It becomes very problematic. So we would like to say it's better to provide a small meal or something during the process of your interview. If you need to obtain, if there's a cost to obtain data that you need, so sometimes there'll be a charge, that's also allowable. So I think those are just some of the examples I can think of. Is there anything specifically that you're wondering about?
Hello.
Yes,
This
please.
is Sityal again. So I have a question. So our chapters had been added in December 2020. So we don't actually have any time to submit annual report. So will it affect our uh, funding in the proposal?
You'd have to email that email and ask them if a report is required. I don't know when they start. I don't know how long you have to be active before they require a report. So then my suggestion is to email Marcella at this email address, info@youthmappers.org, and explain the situation to her. And then she'll contact me and let me know what that decision is. I don't know when. My guess is that if you were added in December, it wouldn't be a requirement because you were just added, but I can't confirm that. So Marcella can confirm that. And so just email her and ask her if you're required to submit an annual report, since you only started in December of 2020.
Thank you.
The call for proposals is on the YouthMapper website.